Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, le président du conseil d'administration, Chairman of the Board de Génome Québec, Monsieur Martin Godbout.
Bon matin. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to chair this session, this opening session this morning. I would like to introduce Dr. Michel Goldman. Michel was the first executive director of the Innovation Medicine Initiative Joint Undertaking, commonly known as IMI, from 2009 to 2014. IMI has a budget of over 2 billion euros provided jointly by the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Association, and of course the European Commission. Michel was responsible for over 59 public-private consortia in the area of major importance, including antimicrobial resistance, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, immunoinflammatory disorders, chronic pulmonary disease, and drug safety. Currently, Dr. Goldman is Professor of Immunology and Pharmacotherapy at Université Libre de Bruxelles. He is a member of the Board of Directors of CQDM here in Montreal, the Board of Tuberculosis Vaccine Initiative, and this is where Genome Quebec has known Dr. Goldman. He is on the Strategic and Scientific Advisory Board of Genome Quebec. Finally, since November 2015, Dr. Goldman will serve as the first director of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare, the I3H, newly created by the Université Libre de Bruxelles to foster research, education, and outreach networks for the benefit of patients and other stakeholders. Please have a warm welcome to Dr. Goldman.
So thank you very much for your kind introduction, and let me start by telling you that it's a real pleasure to be here in Montreal for a number of reasons. I have many friends here and many collaboration, as you realize. And also, when I look at the program of this conference, I think that it offers me a very good opportunity to tell you about, the vision that we are developing in Brussels on interdisciplinarity and public-private partnerships as pillars of patient-centric innovation. Now, since I'm in Montreal, and since we are talking about personalized care and personalized medicine, I thought that I should start this talk by two quotes from Sir William Osler. I'm sure that many of you know about him. He's a famous doctor who was born in Canada, who was graduate as MD from McGill, then made an extraordinary career at Hopkins and at Oxford. And he still today, for me, he really is inspiring a lot the vision that I'm trying to develop. He was very close from his patient, and I think that if you think about personalized medicine, it's very interesting to read again what he wrote at the time. I think that at McGill University there is a special library around William Osler, and I will start with this quote, which I think is very relevant. Variability is the law of life, as no two faces are the same, as no two bodies are alike, and no two individuals react alike under the abnormal condition, which we know as disease. And I think it's very important that we keep this notion, as well as the fact that we are talking about disease, but we should never forget the patient behind. And for me, this is really the broad definition of a personalized approach to medicine. It goes much beyond, the usual use of biomarker and patient stratification. I think that when we talk about personalized or personal medicine, we should remember that indeed the great physician is the one who put the patient at the forefront and who treats actually not the disease, but the patient who has the disease. Now, at the time of Osler and until recently and still nowadays, most of the time we diagnose and treat based on symptoms reported by the patients or the caregiver, and we interpret those symptoms very often in a subjective manner to translate these symptoms into a disease. And I will come back to that. Very often, you know, those disease or the disease process is not well characterized. Just think about Alzheimer's disease. We still use the name of the pathologist who described the brain lesions in patients who died from Alzheimer's. This doesn't tell you anything about, you know, the real cause of the disease, and actually we are probably dealing with more with a syndrome with multiple different causes, sometimes genetic, sometimes environmental. So the future, as you know, and this is the theme of your conference, the idea is to diagnose and treat based on, you know, the omics technology, the imaging technology, and select medication not on a subjective evaluation, but on an objective evaluation based on these new parameters, and also based on the evaluation of the benefit-risk ratio of a given drug for a given patient. Why is it so important to implement this shift to personalized care and this new approach? First, I just mentioned Alzheimer's. As you know, the incidence of this disease is constantly growing. It's a real major threat for societies. You have the numbers here, you know this very well. And you know that 3 different companies invest a lot of money in developing new drugs targeting beta amyloid. And as you also know, all these trials unfortunately failed. Goldman Sachs estimates that about $10 billion have been invested so far in the so-called amyloid theory behind Alzheimer's. Obviously, this is an extremely difficult disease or syndrome to address for a number of reasons: the complexity of the brain pathology, the heterogeneity of patients. I just mentioned that probably we are dealing with multiple causes, and the fact that we don't have really a useful biomarker to monitor the disease activity. At the other extreme of life, you have autism, which affects up to 1% of our children, and which is also a very difficult brain disorder to address for a number of reasons. But I would like to include here the fact that there has been allegation that the mumps, measles, and rubella vaccine was causing the disease. This was especially a theory prevalent in the United Kingdom. In France, there has been theories about the psychoanalytic cause of the disease, making the mothers the culprits of the development of autism in children. We know that all this is completely false. We know that this disorder or the spectrum of disorder has a strong genetic component, and we learn more and more about, you know, the fundamental causes of autism, with the possibility perhaps to develop efficient drug in a not too distant future. Now, these are diseases for which, in a way, we don't have today efficient treatments. No, but let's think about disease for which we have treatment. Let's think about epilepsy. As you know, we have many drugs available. They are listed here. But still, about 1/3 of our patients are resistant to medical treatment, again demonstrating clearly the heterogeneity. Demonstrated that the pharma industry so far has put a lot of effort, but still we are left with a significant number of patients without at least pharmaceutical option. We have surgical option, we have the option of the stimulation of the vagal nerve, but still it demonstrates that even when we have drugs available, there is still a lot of progress to be made. The same is true for multiple sclerosis. As you know, there have been over the last 10 or 15 years a number of new efficient treatments for the treatment of this disease. I will give you one example later in the talk. But these new treatments are quite efficient in preventing relapse of the disease. So they are efficient in the so-called relapsing remitting form of the disease, but if you look at the degenerative aspect of the disease, the fact that the disease is still progressing outside the flares, there again, the new treatments are not efficient. Actually, they are probably not only of immune nature, and that's the reason why all these new immunosuppressive drugs which have been developed are not efficient to prevent those degenerative lesions and the associated disabilities. So things must change. It must change from a patient perspective. It must change from an industry perspective. You all know very well, you know the lengths and the cost of the usual process leading to the development of new drugs. I will not elaborate on that. This is well known. What is also known, because again it's the major topic of this conference, is that the future is to improve prevention by identifying the groups at risk for certain disease states for which we will target the prevention measures. We want to make the diagnosis of the disease process more accurate and to occur much earlier. And obviously, that's personal care. We want to tailor therapies according to the need of individual patient. The point I would like to emphasize here is that when we talk about personalized care, we should never forget drug safety and the fact that precision medicine is also about, identifying the patient who might be at risk of developing adverse reaction to certain drugs. So, again, as you know, the idea is to implement a paradigm shift which means from industry to move away from the blockbuster pharmacotherapies to stratified delivery of treatment, which, and I will come back to that, will require new business model, new investment and pricing models. So as you know, as you saw on the previous slide, it means that we will treat with a given drug lower numbers of patients. And actually, I would like to make the point here that rare disease are obviously an area in which precision medicine can not only bring a lot, but also we have a lot to learn from the past about the power of rare disease to accelerate and to foster therapeutic innovation. And on this slide, I just took a few examples of drugs that you know very well. Let's take statins. The efficiency of statin was initially demonstrated in a single patient with a familial genetic form of hypercholesterolemia. And some of you may know Helen Dobbs, who is behind the development of all these antibodies against PCSK9. And again, it's an observation of a few patients, actually few individuals, they were healthy, identified in a family, which lead to the identification of PCSK9 as an important target for new anti-hypercholesterolemia drugs. So if you think about the drugs, some of the new drugs targeting IL-1 in rheumatoid arthritis, again, they were first shown to be efficient and approved in a very rare disease, which is the Michel-Wells syndrome. And we could multiply the examples. So rare disease tells us a lot. Now, obviously, precision medicine today is already applied in a number of more frequent disorders, certainly that chronic myeloid leukemia with Gleevec as you know, the pioneer drug, which was developed to target this gene fusion protein. But we have other examples, and also we have example now in precision medicine of the importance of the use of pharmacogenomics in tailoring patients. Again, I think that you know all these things very well, so I will not go into details. But what I would like to discuss now for the rest of my talk is how can we move precision medicine forward? How can we multiply the example I just gave for frequent disease, for rare disease? And actually, I would like to address the following points. We need to develop a new taxonomy, a new classification of disease. It's an effort which is already at the forefront in the United States with the Institute of Medicine. I would like to emphasize that we need to change, to improve the way we conduct clinical trials. I will then briefly allude to a very important aspect, which is the development of patient-reported outcomes. I will address key questions related to data sharing, regulatory science, and I will also address the need to develop new innovative financial scheme to promote the development of precision medicine. Let's start with the new classification of the disease. So I will take a few examples from the time where I was indeed the executive director of IMI, and we launched this project which aimed at the definition of severe asthma. You know, asthma is a disease with multiple causes. We all know the allergic asthma, but there are other causes also, different forms of the disease. And the new treatment, I'm especially thinking about the treatment targeting cytokines such as IL-4, IL-13, or IL-5, will only be active in certain types of disease. So it's really a good example where we can show that it's very important to better characterize the patient to develop these new drugs. And this is the effort which has been conducted by a partnership between 9 different major pharmas, academic institutions, patients' organizations, and I cannot insist enough of the need to involve patient organizations in this effort to develop new classification of the disease. So this is really one of the first examples of the point I will make at the very end of my talk, which is the need for collaboration and partnership. All what we are discussing from now will require people to go beyond their comfort zone, will involve people to interact with other individuals from other disciplines, and to really put the patient at the center. So, new taxonomy of disease, I already mentioned, I gave the example of asthma, but this will apply, for example, I'm sure, to Alzheimer's. Now, clinical trials. Clinical trials today are not very efficient. You have to know that when you consider all clinical trials, about 1/3 of them will never be completed because the patients are not recruited as planned. And actually, the delay in the recruitment is often quite impressive. But what is also impressive is the fact that for diseases for which there is a huge need, let's take Parkinson, if you talk to patients who are desperately in need of new treatment and you ask them, was you involved in a trial? Did you have a chance to test a new drug? 9 out of 10 will tell you no. So this means that we have a real problem in the organization of trial. Again, we could spend a whole conference to discuss how to rejuvenate the design of clinical trials. As you know, so far, the gold standard is the randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. I always take this example. If you, for a moment, think that you are yourself a patient or one of your beloved one, and you go to your doctor and he will tell you, I have a very bad news for you. You have a very severe disease, let's say a form of cancer, for which we don't have efficient treatment, so that's sad, bad news. But we have a good news for you, is that just recently a new drug appeared and seems to be quite promising. Okay, and then you will say, okay, I'm interested, of course, because I think that's my best chance. But then the doctor will tell you, but you know, to get a chance to give this drug, you have to enroll in a trial, because this is the way new drugs are developed. And then you realize that you might have 50% of chance to receive a placebo or another drug which is not efficient. This is not sustainable. And especially in cancer, but you can take, you know, other examples. So there are today major efforts, interestingly enough, conducted by the regulatory agencies, and I'm quite proud to say that the European Medicine Agency is really at the forefront to really promote new types of trials, the so-called adaptive or seamless trials, during which you can use data collected in the course of the trial to adapt the trial and to include more patients with an increased chance to get an active drug. You also, in this trial design, have the opportunity to test drug combination as the study progresses. These are not easy trials to organize. You need very strong statisticians, bioinformatics, the so-called Bayesian statistics behind. It proved to be quite efficient, for example, in the ICPHC trial in breast cancer in the US. And I really think that more and more we will see this type of trial. There was a recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine about a new treatment for lung cancer, I think, where they really push a lot this idea to develop these seamless trials. Also, instead of starting, you know, each trial de novo and having to recruit patients through centers and through contract research organization, the idea is to use existing registries of patients so that those patients and those registries are fully ready to start or to participate in a trial without the need to go through these enrollment procedures. Now, what must also change in the trials is the parameters you are looking for. Let's take again the example of Parkinson. This is a complicated slide. Basically, it shows that a number of treatments have been developed over the years for Parkinson. But again, coming back to some example I discussed at the beginning of my talk, when you look at all these treatments, basically they target the same pathway, the so-called dopaminergic pathway. You know that dopamine neurons are depleted in Parkinson. But we know that in the disease, many important symptoms are not caused by a defect in this pathway. Let's think, for example, at depression, at other type of mental disorders associated with Parkinson. And there, we don't have new treatment. And one of the reasons is that those developing the drugs tend to focus the criteria for efficiency to, you know, obviously the parameters which have the best chance to be affected. So that's why it's so important to include patients in the design of the trial, to ask them what's really relevant to them, what matters to them, so that we avoid this type of situation where, you know, the doctor will say, well, that's fine, the endoscopy, in the case of I don't know which type of gastrointestinal disease, the endoscopic lesion disappeared, but the patient will tell you how the symptoms he has to live with. So it's very important that we find a way to capture in the evaluation of new treatment, in clinical trial, what matters to patients. So again, an example from the IMI project. That's in this case, it was chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic bronchitis. And the idea there was to ask two types of things to the patient. First, to have on his chest during the day a device which will record his activity. And also, patients will be asked to fill through their smartphone easy questionnaire about how they feel, the type of symptoms they have. And all this is indeed transmitted to the investigators and to the MDs. And as you know very well, we will see more and more of the involvement of patients in healthcare monitoring through all these devices. Obviously, the watches is quite popular, but there might be a number of other devices which will be used to record objectively symptoms, features which are important, and which will be again reported in a way by the patient, him or herself. Now that's all nice, but I know that you discussed quite extensively big data yesterday. These generate massive amount of data of different types, of different origins. And as you know, and as already discussed, we have still today the problem to link those data together and to perform analysis which will indeed inform efficiently for the development of new treatment. Just to give you one example of one of the first studies launched by IMI, which is the New Meds study. And the idea there was to look at previous trials conducted by 5 different companies on more than 10,000 patients. You know, has been 34 clinical trials testing new antipsychotics. And the idea there was to see whether those trials could have been more efficient. And to look at this, the companies agreed to pool all the data from all these different trials and to perform a meta-analysis, if you wish, which is now published. And the results were quite impressive. It showed that by sharing all these data, the companies and the academics associates demonstrate that it's possible to significantly reduce the number of patients that you have to enter in the trial, the duration of observation, if you follow certain criteria, especially regarding gender balance and the type of symptoms you are following. So on this basis, IMI established a new platform, which is quite impressive. It's based on the Transmart informatic systems. And this platform, which is used in IMI, but also outside, allows to combine data from different types and for multiple origin. Just think about the challenge to combine in the same analysis data from omics and data from imaging. And more recently, under the leadership of my successor, that you know very well because he was the CEO of Genome Canada, Pierre Melien, who is really, I must say, doing a wonderful job. So he launched this project, Big Data for Better Outcome, which again is the idea to improve the way large data sets are used. Big data can be exploited to develop sustainable healthcare systems. Now, we have to share data. We have to share big data. We need tools to organize data collection, organize data analysis. But what's critical is the quality of the data. If you enter data which are not reliable, you just lose your resources. And in the medical field, we have a real problem. This is an analysis which has made about, papers which had to be retracted at some point for one or the other reason. And what you see on this slide is on the horizontal axis, you see that medicine is at in the right, because it demonstrates that that's not surprising, that medicine is the field where you have the highest number of publications. But on the vertical axis, that's more interesting. It shows in which disciplines you have most often papers to be retracted. And there clearly medicine is in the lead for reasons that I have no time to discuss. Obviously you can think of fraud, but you can also think about the reproducibility of data in biomedical science, which is a real challenge, and academia is very often criticized by industry about this. And I think it's very important that we all put a lot of effort in improving this situation. For a number of reasons, not only to please industry, but these problematics expose our patients to risks, to drugs which might be detrimental. And you have here some numbers indicating the number of patients which were treated with drugs which proved to be, after some point, not to have the effect which were initially published. So that's quite impressive, and we have really to change this. So quality of the data is one aspect. The other aspect is the development of standards, which is as important. The Alzheimer's studies I was mentioning are a good example. These 3 phase 3 trials, it's almost impossible to combine the data because, the way data were recorded, the parameters that were recorded are similar but not the same. So it makes the pooled analysis extremely difficult. So we have to agree to develop some type of agreement about what we are measuring in different trials from different sponsors, but on the same disease entity. That's why the CDISC organization is doing. They are primarily based in the US. I guess that they are active here in Canada too. They are active in Europe, and we organized an agreement with IMI at the time. And the idea is simply to agree on the adoption of standards for clinical investigation, and together with Becky Kush from the CDISC, we published 2 years ago a paper in the New England where we explain why it's so important to develop these standards, because the concept there is that to say data sharing is not sufficient. You have to share data in a responsible manner in terms of quality and also in terms of standards. So we were talking about patient-reported outcomes, about what matters to patients, and there I would like to mention this effort, which again is a partnership between an academic institution, Harvard, and another, Karolinska in Sweden, and the Boston Consulting Group. They put a lot of effort to develop standards to agree on what should be considered as the key health outcomes. They already cover about 50% of existing diseases, and they will continue this. Again, if you are interested, there has been a recent paper by Michael Porter in the New England describing this effort. It was published in 2016. Let's move to regulatory science. Until recently, regulators were seen as, the policemen of the system. This is changing. Obviously, they are there to protect our population for adverse events caused by drugs, but they realize under the pressure of patients very often that they should have a different role, which is to base their decisions, their guidelines on the assessment not only of a risk, but on the benefit-risk ratio. I don't know if you are familiar with the story of natalizumab in multiple sclerosis. I will tell you briefly this story, which I think is quite interesting as an example. Natalizumab, the commercial name in Europe is Tizabri, it might be the same here, is a biological, a monoclonal antibody which targets certain adhesion molecule which prevent lymphocytes to enter the brain and to cause the lesions of multiple sclerosis. This drug really transformed the lives of patients with MS. But after a few months, some cases of a severe brain viral infection were reported in patients receiving the drugs. The so-called progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, PML. And quite rapidly it appears that indeed there has been very rare cases of patients receiving the drug developing this very severe complication. On this basis, the regulators and the company decide to withdraw the drug from the market. And what happens there, it took 2 years, is that the patients' organization themselves, develop advocacy activities and said, okay, you cannot decide this for me. I'm ready as a patient to take this risk. I'm even ready to take the risk to die because this drug really changed my life. I was able to take my job again, etc., etc. And finally, indeed, the regulators and obviously the company agreed to reintroduce the drug on the market. It's on the market today. And what has been done in the context of a project at IMI, which was led by the European Medicine Agency, was to develop algorithm and visual representation of benefit-risk ratio, which is shown here. In green, you have the positive effect in terms of reduction of relapse, and in red, the side effects. And what you can see here is that the weight of this viral infection I was mentioning is extremely low, simply because the number of patients is extremely low. So that, as you see, the whole evaluation in green was clearly positive. And the idea now of the regulator is to develop this type of assessment, but prospectively, so to avoid the repetition of withdrawal of a drug with a beneficial benefit-risk ratio. So let's move to financial schemes. Until recently, and still today, when we think about access to medicine, people think about small income or middle income countries. How shall we provide drugs to address tropical disease and so on, or other type of disease prevalent in those countries. But the point I would like to make here is that I really think that we will face soon the same situation in our countries. And I think that as MDs or other professionals in healthcare, this is something that we cannot accept. So the question is, how can we accelerate the delivery of promising efficient drugs to our patients? One way to do it, again, I don't have time to go into details, but it's to change the way drugs are approved. Nowadays, drugs are approved after a lengthy process. Then there is a go, no-go decision by the regulatory agencies, and then there are negotiations between the firms and those paying for the drugs. And one possibility would be to allow much earlier in the drug development process the approval of the drug for very specific group of patients in which the efficacy is without any doubt. Then the drug would be licensed at this stage, could be delivered to these patients at the condition that the sponsor or the firm agree to continue the clinical investigation, especially on the safety, but also on the possible extension to other patient groups. So the idea there is that indeed more patients will benefit from an efficient drug. There might be a concern that all the protection for safety will not be there, but still recent evaluations suggest that the risk there is very low as compared to the benefit. Now, as you know, in medicine today, one of the most impressive advances in the field of cancer is the development of this immunotherapy based on immune checkpoint inhibitors. And as you know, this was first demonstrated in melanoma. There are 2 or 3 or even today more drugs, monoclonals, which are available. So I use this paper, again from the New England, as an example. What is shown here is that the combination of 2 drugs, of 2 monoclonal, provide better result than a single drug. Now you have to know that the cost of each of these drugs per year is extremely high. It's, probably in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 a year per patient. So who will pay for that? And who will pay for the combination? And what's the reasonable price? These are real problems that we have to face and we have to reflect on. And economists start to think about it, not only health economists, but also people dealing with theoretical economy. This is an example of a paper by the group of Andy Lowe at the MIT. You see that the title is quite provocative. Can financial engineering cure cancer? And it's very important that all of us thinking about, all this personalized care and, new cancer treatment, we think that those aspects are also very important if we want to provide the best help to our patients. Again, we need new financial scheme. We certainly need more money. I'm sure that you all agree. But I think that this quote by the CEO of the Michael J. Fox Foundation in the US is quite important. Again, money without collaboration won't bring cures. In order to use the money wisely, you need collaboration. This is also a statement made by industry, in this case by Elia Zeroni, who, as you know, is the global R&D head of Sanofi, previously director of the NIH in the US. And he made very clear that, indeed, collaboration across scientific and medical community is a prerequisite to move forward. Now, we'll come back to the fact that collaboration should go across scientific fields. So you mentioned IMI. Actually, with the second phase led by Pierre Melien, it will be a total of €5 billion, which will have been spent jointly by the industry and the Commission to support, these investigators from different fields. And you see here that what we did with IMI is to create a community without borders involving all these stakeholders. Now, one of the very important lessons that I learned there, and I see this also in my role at CQDM, for example, where people like Diane Gosselin are doing an excellent job. You need a honest broker when you want to bring all these people together. And I think that it's not always an easy job because you are under pressure from the different stakeholders, but that's very important. And again, I think that Canada is certainly at the forefront there. You have a number of organizations, including yours, at GNM Quebec, where I was happy to collaborate at some point with. Now, the other important lesson is that to work with industry in these large consortia doesn't prevent you as an academic to publish in good papers, to develop your curriculum vitae, your credentials. And this is an analysis that we publish in Nature Biotechnology, in which we demonstrate that actually as compared with, work supported by other sources of funding, exclusively public, actually in IMI, the output and the impact of our paper is actually higher and reach the level of the NIH. Now, what the other lesson that I learned is the need to develop metrics to assess the performance of collaboration. That's not easy, and we propose that the impact of the activities on the partnership on the regulatory framework, on the development of standards, is certainly a very important point, as well as the fact that people outside the partnership become involved. And for example, the involvement of charities in IMI projects, such as the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation or the Gates Foundation, which approach us once the project were launched, demonstrate that what we are doing is considered of interest for, by those philanthropic organizations. Now, I would like to end this talk by telling you about this interesting paper in Science where, and I'm sure that many of you know this paper, where there was 10 recommendations about how to achieve precision medicine. And the point I would like to make is the importance of education. I think that our duty is to prepare the next generation of professionals, whatever they are, who will indeed be able to implement this new vision of precision medicine. And for me, it starts by definition new frontiers, also from the so-called translational medicines. I think that we need probably to refine our definition. And the idea there is really to take a holistic approach to address the major public health challenges I already alluded to. It's really to consider all the different steps from basic research to access to medicines, to standard of care. And the point I would like to make is wherever you are in the chain, whether you are a basic scientist working on animal models or whether you are working in a payer organization, you should have a minimum of knowledge about the full chain. And this is really lacking today. And for this, what we need is to explain that the future is interdisciplinarity, to really cover the full spectrum from basic research to patient-centric care. You need interdisciplinarity to improve preclinical research, clinical research. We mentioned the need for bioinformaticians, for statisticians, just to give you one example. Health technology development, that's extremely important, both for diagnostic, just think about functional imaging, the omics, therapeutics. The pharma industry is losing more and more its monopoly. Think about medical devices, what we do in heart surgery, deep brain stimulation. These are just a few examples. Think about proton therapy for cancer in the future. And you need also interdisciplinarity when you consider patient access. To take the right decision, regulators and payers must know where a new therapy is coming from and what can be expected. So the point I would like to make is that more and more there will be a convergence in medicine with other disciplines, life science, physics, engineering, economics, management, and humanities. I think that we should never lose the perspective of the patient and of society. So these interdisciplinary programs have to be implemented in the universities, including in the academic hospital. This is a recent report trying to anticipate what will be the hospital of the future, and you will see that among their 10 recommendations, there were clear recommendations about educations of the new professionals, and also there are clear indications about the new type of job that will be needed in the hospitals of the future. And actually, this is what I'm dedicating my effort right now with the help of Hilde Stevens, who is in the audience, is really to develop new education program to train the future leaders and stakeholders on those complex issues. And the idea there is to develop a program really across the faculties, across the university. That's not easy, you know, when you talk as a MD to people from the economics faculty, they are really wondering, you know, what you are doing in their, in their field, in their garden. So there is a lot of efforts needed, but now we receive some significant support from public and private origin. We want also to extend this to other universities. Actually, I have a meeting this afternoon at the Université de Montréal with your vice rectors to discuss what could be done together. And actually, Canada has a quite interesting experience in bringing interdisciplinarity to reality. And also my intention is to use an open access journal, and I'm the editor of Frontiers in Medicine, which could help to make, you know, the type of courses we will develop accessible to the wider community worldwide. And actually it is in this journal that I recently described this vision of a new education program in medicine. So I start with a quote of Osler. I will end with a quote of Osler, because all what we are discussing here will allow us to make progress. But still, and that should be part of the education, medicine will remain a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Goldman. We still have 8-9 minutes. I think we can open the floor for questions, and I would start with one, the privilege of a chair. You alluded, thank you for the clear and stimulating presentation. It's very well presented. You alluded at the end and also in the core of your presentation the role of the patient advocacy groups.
Yeah.
And also the role in the United States and a little in Canada, we talk about venture philanthropy, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Juvenile Diabetes Foundations, sometimes led by famous either actors or philanthropists. And they have a very highlighting way of getting involved in research as a VC because they made their money, but also as a VC because they want to get some result out of the millions of dollars that they are collecting. How do you see their role in the next year to 5 years, getting involved with the big pharma, with organizations like yours or IMI and Genome Canada and other organizations that are leading the way in large-scale projects in genomics, proteomics?
So thank you very much for your question. I think it's very important. You have to know that I'm a senior fellow of Faster Cure, so I had, you know, very regular contact with Michael Milken. I guess that is one of the figures you was referring to, but there are others. I think that these people are really visionary. I think it's very important that people, wherever they are in the chain, that they realize this is not a game. It's not just to make more publication, to move their career forward, and they have a duty. And I think that very often, I think that those providing resources, including, you know, the public funding, don't explain this enough. Don't take me wrong. I think that we still need creativity, imagination, so we should avoid, you know, to be too directive to the researchers. But once they found something, even by serendipity, they have an obligation to society or to those who invest to do everything they can to organize the return to society, which very often means that they will have to leave their baby grow outside their own control. And I think that this is a point that is very well explained by these venture philanthropists. And obviously this must be controlled in a way or another. We can have debate on that. But I think the principle to have people with a philanthropic mind telling, okay, we will put a lot of resources on that, but we will follow this closely, and we want to see the return. I think that's good, and I think it's quite interesting that Michael Milken, as you probably know, is now supporting a public health institute in the US. So I think that also this philanthropic organization allow to have this holistic vision because they can decide what is needed. They have more flexibility than the usual funding organization. So I think they have a very important role to play, but they have to also to agree to listen to the other stakeholders, which sometimes is a challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmed?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's a beautiful talk.
Thank you.
And, but I have a little point which I think needs further reflection. In one of your slides, you mentioned that the judging the efficacy is on patenting. Now, the patenting is a big problem in our field at present days, especially in North America, because if it's given by the nature, it cannot be patented. How is that? And the people are trying to make a secret instead of patenting, where secret means not sharing. It has a double sword in this, that by refusing patenting on everything which we invent in personalized medicine based on omics, is not going to be patentable, therefore it's going to be secret. We may not fulfill the goal which the United States Supreme Court has when they damage patenting or they put it away.
Yeah.
Does it need a reflection? I think it needs to have an open reflection of the consequences of this behavior.
Thank you very much for your question, Pavel. I hope I was clear. If I was not clear, I guess that Hilde will tell me that I should change the way I explain this, because my point was about licensing. So, because you need at some point the regulators to accept that the drug can go into patients. So that was my point. In terms of patent, you are fully right, and actually with Hilde and others, we are conducting reflection about, IP in this system. I think we are not there yet. There are models like the patent pools, which is quite interesting. It's quite complex, but again, your question, which is so central, demonstrates the need for interdisciplinarity. Yes. We need lawyers, we need economists, which will design which is the right patent system. I don't have the answer. What I know, and I agree with you, is that the current system, in a way, is not sustainable. No. It's not sustainable for society, it's not sustainable for patients, it's even probably not sustainable as it is for industry. So we have to fix this. How? We need people from other fields to help us to create something new.
Thank you.
Hi, this was a really interesting talk. I have a question regarding educational program that you have, because you mentioned for the healthcare provider and the community involved in that. But I think one of the challenge that we will need to confront and address, and sooner than later, I think it's the education of the public on the premises and the reality of personalized medicine, because they might come to the hospital and they have a test, let's say in cancer, and so the doctor finds what seems to be the problems, but then the next comment may be, well, there's no drug for you, or there's no, so I think, how, do you have something in mind, or are you working on that as well?
Again, thank you very much for your question. So let me clarify one point. Our first target for education program will be the younger students, those in undergraduate studies. And just to tell you, in Belgium also, in France, in other countries, we have a problem with the number of doctors which can have access to social security. And I'm making the point that if you are interested to do something in medicine, I mean, you can do a lot of things outside the regular system by working for NGOs, by working for patients' organizations. So I think that what we have to change first is the way the younger generation sees all the jobs around medicine and healthcare. Now, I didn't answer your question about patients, which is critical. But, and it's not easy, because when you are dealing with patient organizations, each one is, promoting its own disease. And this is not very productive. So that's why I insist on humanities. I think that and again, I don't have the solution to propose right now, but I think we need to take a scientific perspective. That's why we need sociologists, probably psychologists and people, in this discipline to help us. It's a challenge because you mentioned personalized care. I have much more of a problem simply with vaccines. When I see the problem of vaccine coverage in our countries today, so we have been very bad in communicating, even on obvious things. People still, I don't know if this country, but in the US and some European countries, people are still claiming that still measles, mild measles, the measles vaccine could cause autism. So I think that we have really to work on this. One of the things that we will do in our education program is to involve patients, but also as teachers. I think that for the younger student to hear the experience of patients themselves might be important. And I think that the way, I'm not sure that we should target the patients really. We should target society. So, and I think that what we should target is the schools.
That's what I said, public. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that's... Thank you.
One last question before we move to the coffee break in the foyer.
Thank you for this excellent talk. You had spoken about the very important need to have patients around the table in the design of the studies and to know what is important to them, and we all agree this is critically important. As a consultant who has worked for many years with groups that are launching trials and so on, what I have seen is there's a race against time to get the studies done, and oftentimes the people in the driver's seat of running those trials, that's often CROs, AROs, sponsors, they see patients as potential obstacles because they take up time and they ask a lot of questions, and I think there's a need to sensitize and for education around this issue. Can you comment on this, please?
Well, I cannot agree more. I think that the way clinical trials are conducted today, as I said, we should think again about the design, but the way the communication with the patient and the involvement of the patient is organized is critical. But I'm personally convinced that these new digital health systems, the mobile health, will change this. And I think that with the younger generation, we were talking about the public. I see children 1 year old playing with their iPads. So now their iPad, they will see things about health. So I think that progressively, through this digital revolution, things will improve.
Absolutely. So a good warm round of applause for Dr. Michel Goldman.
Thank you very much.